Gary, big day.
Very big day. The biggest tree that's been not exactly felled but heavily pruned is Dominic Raab. He got a lot of capital credit with the Prime Minister when he stood in for the Prime Minister when he was seriously ill with COVID, but he seemed to have burnt through it. We don't know whether that was because of complaints that were coming from the Foreign Office about how they said he was a control freak who couldn't get through his workload, whether it was because of his handling of the Afghan episode, or maybe even very particularly because of the way he dobbed the Prime Minister in as telling him he could stay on holiday, but he's been demoted, and I'm not sure Deputy Prime Minister means a lot as a title, but it was a sweetener offered. Liz Truss now picks up the plane tickets he was going to use to go with the Prime Minister to New York, so the job gets very serious as soon as this weekend. And the casualty that the public, as you were saying, will really recognise in all of this, though, is Gavin Williamson. It's the second time he's been removed from the Cabinet by a Prime Minister. Theresa May felt she had to do it when he was in the Cabinet, and I think Gavin Williamson knows tonight his Cabinet career is over.
Sack Gavin Williamson! Sack Gavin Williamson!
Just over a year later, they got what they wanted. The Education Secretary, at the centre of last year's exams fiasco, was sacked by the Prime Minister, as was the Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick, and the Justice Secretary, Robert BUCKLAND. But it's Gavin Williamson who became a household name as his department wrestled with how to grade students during lockdown.
Well, first of all, I'd like to emphasise how sorry I am.
Well done. So we've got Harold Gobbins.
The former Chief Whip lasted another 13 months after that apology. Boris Johnson told allies he didn't want the wily fixer who'd run his leadership campaign, and before that, Theresa May's, causing trouble on the backbenches. The calculation in number 10 is such powers are now spent. The biggest emotion is for Dominic Raab, no longer Foreign Secretary, replaced by Liz Truss. Liz Truss had been negotiating post-Brexit trade deals and is no slouch in trumpeting them. For years she's been mocked by some for snapping her every move. But her attacks on political correctness have helped to make her the darling of the party grassroots. Robert BUCKLAND was sacked as Justice Secretary to make room for Dominic Raab as he fell from the Foreign Office. Mr Raab managed a rictus grin as he left Downing Street. He was given the consolation prize of the title Deputy Prime Minister, the first time it's been revived since Nick Clegg served under David Cameron. The Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, was sacked. His replacement, Michael Gove, had hoped for a bigger job. But Michael Gove was the man who 4 years ago caused this upset when he torpedoed Boris Johnson's leadership campaign.
I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Front row and clearly shaken by the news, Nadine Dorries, the new Culture Secretary, and Nadeem Zahawi, now promoted to Education Secretary. Nadine Dorries is a past contestant on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, with a reputation for outspoken attacks on liberal opinion, and sometimes on her own side.
Not only are Cameron and Osborne two posh boys who don't know the price of milk, but they're two arrogant posh boys.
Yeah. Are we going the wrong way? Let's get that way. Sorry, my mistake.
Weeks of reshuffle uncertainty are now ended at cabinet level. Lower ranks in the government now sit by the phone.
Well, Gary, what do we learn from all this? What do we know about Boris Johnson and Johnsonism, whatever that is?
A lot of people will be looking at this to see, well, is it all about the Leave-Remain balance in the cabinet? Is that what Johnsonism is about? Because there were signs in previous cabinets that is what he was about. And the number of leavers in the cabinet has gone up. But I don't think it is fundamentally about that, although you do have to say that Tory cabinets at the moment do not look like a warm house for Remainers. Some people have been waiting to see, will Boris Johnson revert to what we might have thought of as traditional Tory cabinets? Truly a cabinet of all the talents. You bring in people like Jeremy Hunt from the backbenches. Some Tories, maybe not that many, had been hoping that that was what he would do. He most defiantly did not do that. They're going to have to wait and whistle for that kind of Boris Johnson cabinet. What he does appear to have done is done a sort of crowd-pleasing routine for the Tory grassroots. If you look down the list of who are the most popular Tories in Parliament with the grassroots, there are an awful lot of the people who've now in that cabinet. Priti Patel staying there, huge favourite with the party activists. Liz Truss now in a bigger position. Nadine Dorries, these are culture war vanguardists. They take on the liberal elite and swat it as far as the Conservative grassroots are concerned. And those people are in very prominent positions. What does that tell you will follow? Well, it might tell you that Boris Johnson feels he needs to keep the party managed well, because he's going to have to be doing quite a few things in the next few years, which maybe the party doesn't like.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, MPs are currently voting, and we do hope to be joined by one of them soon to discuss the reshuffle. But first, we're joined on the line by columnist and founder of the Conservative Home website, Tim Montgomery, and Caroline Slowcock, who, as a civil servant, was private secretary to Margaret Thatcher and John Major. Tim Montgomery, first, what does the reshuffle tell you from what you've seen of it?
I think it's a very political reshuffle. I agree with everything Gary has just said to you, Kathy. The people that have been promoted are people who are at the top of a league table I founded when I edited Conservative Home. It regularly polls grassroots members. And if you look at those, the people at the top of that poll, they've been promoted. The people at the bottom of the poll have been demoted or sacked. Now, I'm all for Conservative Home, the website I started getting influence, but my worry is that just being in touch with your political grassroots isn't necessarily the best criteria for being Foreign Secretary or Home Secretary. I regret that Boris Johnson, who I support in many ways, is still not building a big tent conservatism. There are lots of respectable divisions in the party over Brexit and COVID. He's not brought in big beasts. He's not got his best team around the table. And I think that's regrettable, because the country faces big challenges and it needs its biggest hitters at the heart of government.
Caroline Slowcock, at a reshuffle, the Prime Minister is the most powerful he or she will ever be. Has Boris Johnson used that power well, do you think?
Well, I think he's undertaken this in order to consolidate his power and his very highly centralised way of running the country from number 10. But I think there's potentially bad blood that he's created in the relationships with his ministers. I think the most interesting thing about this reshuffle really is the timing, which is very bad in lots of respects for the big things, the big decisions ahead, but is quite good politically for him, because he's managed to quash rebellions over some key votes, for example, on the social care bill, by threatening this reshuffle. But the bad blood that I particularly see when I see an echo from the days of Margaret Thatcher is what's happened to Dominic Raab. I see an echo with Geoffrey Howe, who was Foreign Secretary in my first few months at number 10. In a reshuffle, he was demoted to Lord President, and he insisted, after long conversations, and I think long conversations took place today with Dominic Raab, that he be given the title of Deputy Prime Minister. But actually, that title meant nothing. It was just trying to cover his embarrassment, and I think the same is probably true with Raab.
Do you concur with that there's trouble ahead from Dominic Raab with the demotion, but also on the backbenches with Gavin Williamson and his pet tarantula?
Indeed. Well, look, one thing I am impressed with about what Boris Johnson has done is he has properly sacked Gavin Williamson. I suspected he would move him into a position like Leader of the House, because there is this worry that he might be a real problem, Machiavellian character that he is, on the backbenches. So I'm glad he's been ruthless with a man who should have been sacked a long time ago. I generally agree, though, with the analysis. The big contrast, of course, between Margaret Thatcher and Boris Johnson is Margaret Thatcher only really started to surround herself with people who agreed with her towards the end of her premiership. At the beginning, she really relished the fact that she had ministers that disagreed with her, that helped sharpen her arguments. Boris has never really had that sort of propensity to really believe in internal debate. Ministers
but
don't
does that actually give him Tim Montgomery, does that actually give him a freedom, as Gary suggested, that he's kept the grassroots happy and perhaps now he's free to do policies that might be unpopular, like raising taxes?
I'm not sure that's the case, actually. I think, look at the national insurance hike, the COVID passport stuff. We've talked a lot about them. I think they're small beer compared to the political problems that are going to be connected with the cancellation of universal credit. I think the government have got themselves into this mess about universal credit, taking £20 million away from 5.5 million households, because there isn't the internal debate inside the Conservative Party, inside the Conservative government, that there needs to be, that means that policies are road tested inside government before they meet the reality of the public domain.
Caroline Slocott, when you think about universal credit, you think about the fact that Sajid Javid proudly said he had a picture of Margaret Thatcher on his wall. Is this quite a Thatcherite cabinet, or do we now say, OK, this is a Johnsonian cabinet?
I think it's a Johnsonian cabinet. It's a cabinet which will toe his line. But that ultimately leads to weak government because, as Tim was saying, good government needs lots of different voices and lots of different inputs. And I think that he's surrounding himself, you might say, with yes men and women, and that's not good for government. But also, just look at the timing again. We've got the climate conference in a few weeks. We've got the spending review. Doing a reshuffle now is quite cynical. It might be good politics, but it's very bad government for long-term planning and for getting some of these really big issues tackled. And universal credit, yes, that's a key issue, but let's look to the longer game of the planet and the key decisions. For example, a new Secretary of State for local governments at a critical time when decisions will be made about putting in some extra money potentially for social care in the short run, which it desperately needs. And ministers, who are just not up on their briefs when these critical decisions are made, and facing a party conference in a few weeks where they may just end up throwing a lot of red meat to the party faithful without really understanding yet what they're talking about.